It is day 80 of Donald Trump's war in Iran and 169 days until the midterms. Every time I say day 80, I think that first week, all those sources I had that said this will be over in 5 days, day 80. My goodness. Today, Donald Trump said he called off a strike on Iran that was set to happen tomorrow. He said he did so at the request of his allies in the region and to allow for serious negotiations with Iran. But just yesterday, the president wrote on social media the following: for Iran, the clock is ticking, and they better get moving fast, or there won't be anything left of them. And with the midterms now, as I just said, less than 6 months away, there is a new sign of just how much the war could drag Republicans down. A new poll from the New York Times shows that 64% of Americans believe the president made the wrong decision in going to war with Iran. That very same poll found Trump's approval rating dropped to a second-term low of 37%. The Times calls that the floor for approval ratings of recent presidencies. And speaking of the midterms, tomorrow is primary election day for Congressman Thomas Massie. Trump has been pushing hard for Massie's defeat, largely because of his pursuit of the Epstein files. Today, Trump's defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, campaigned for Massie's opponent down in Kentucky. Watch this.
President Trump does not need more people in Washington who are trying to make a point, especially from his own party. He needs people willing to help him win, to vote with him when it matters the most. And too often, Thomas Massie has acted like his job is to stand apart from the movement that President Trump leads instead of strengthening it. When President Trump needs backup, Massie wants to debate process. When the movement needs unity, especially at the biggest moments, Massie's willing to vote with Democrats.
With that, let's get smarter. With the help of our lead-off panel tonight, Luke Broadwater is here, Pulitzer Prize-winning White House correspondent for the New York Times. Michael Schnell, MS Now congressional reporter, and retired four-star U.S. Army General Barry McCaffrey, a decorated combat veteran of Vietnam and a former battlefield commander in the Persian Gulf. General, every time I introduce you, I'm honored that I know you. I want to start with the war itself. It seems pretty unusual for a president to reveal that he was going to order a strike tomorrow, but he called it off. Am I right?
I think that was shallow theater. There was nothing going on at all of that nature. Look, we're into the third month of the war. Mr. Trump thought he would win it by a decapitation strike against the political military leadership. It'd be over in 3 or 4 or 5 days. The people would rise up. The armed forces would collapse. Obviously, that wasn't going to happen. Now we're in a situation where after 21,000 IDF and U.S. airstrikes on targets in Iran, we've devastated their conventional military. We clearly have not been able to open the Strait of Hormuz. We've got a couple of thousand ships stuck either in the Persian Gulf or along the Gulf of Oman. And Mr. Trump has neither congressional support, American people support, allied support. He's stuck. It's hard to know how this will come out. There are no good military options to achieve his stated major goal of taking control of Iran's nuclear weapons program. You know, probably 5-10 tons of 20% to 60% enriched uranium. We're not going to get it with an airborne assault by the 82nd Airborne. So he's got very few options but to negotiate a settlement and get inspectors back on the ground.
Luke, have we gotten any confirmation from these Gulf allies that Trump was going to strike, but they asked him to call it off?
Well, what I'm seeing here is a pattern where Donald Trump is once again making big threats. You know, it wasn't too long ago he threatened to wipe out the entire civilization of Iran. He threatened to strike their bridges. He's threatened to strike their energy sectors. Things that many people have described as potential war crimes. And then every time, right up against this deadline, he then backs off and says, well, negotiations are underway. Pakistan asked me not to do it. This time he's saying Qatar asked him not to do it. You know, we haven't independently confirmed that with Qatar. But it really is a pattern now. And each time he's making these threats, it kind of loses credibility because you do it again and again and again, and people can see through the pattern.
Michael, you are in Kentucky covering Massey's race, and I want to get to the race. But before we do that, it strikes me that we were apparently set to conduct a military strike on Iran tomorrow, and our defense secretary is not in Washington. He's not with the president. He's stumping for a political candidate in Kentucky. What does that tell you about the administration's priorities or their focus?
Yeah, Steph, I was in the room this afternoon when Secretary Pete Hegseth was stumping alongside Ed Gallrein. He is the Republican challenger to Thomas Massie, someone who was handpicked by President Trump, endorsed by President Trump, and is now taking on Massie in this race. It was so unconventional for a number of reasons. First off, you don't typically see the defense secretary on the campaign trail. Second off, you don't see a defense secretary on the campaign trail during a war that the president's been looking for an off-ramp on and hasn't been able to. And then thirdly, this was not like a presidential election or even a Senate seat election. This is a House Republican primary in a ruby red district in a ruby red state. It's a race that shouldn't even be on people's radars. But of course, President Trump has made this central to not just the midterms, but whether or not he still has strength within the party. It's part of his revenge tour. And yeah, it was unconventional that the defense secretary was here. And I'll tell you, Thomas Massie picked up on it. I interviewed him this afternoon here in Kentucky at one of his campaign stops, and he said the fact that they had to bring the defense secretary all the way to Kentucky during these circumstances just underscores the fact that the president's team is nervous. Obviously, we'll see we'll see what the consensus is tomorrow once results roll in. But I mean, just this race in Kentucky has been so odd for a number of reasons, and then bringing in the defense secretary during a war for a race that shouldn't even be a topic of conversation, it was just fascinating.
One could argue that Donald Trump is placing the importance or the secrecy of the Epstein files ahead of the war in Iran. And Michael, maybe this is a basic question. Is Pete Hegseth a big draw down there? I mean, yes, he's the defense secretary, but for voters in Kentucky, does he get them out?
Well, that's the other question, right? I mean, this was the last final day of campaigning, the final hours before polls opened. And it was interesting that Pete Hegseth was kind of brought in as the closer. I was in the room again. There were only about 100 folks there. I will note there were a little over 100 seats. Most of them were taken. And the voters that I had spoken to spoke highly of Pete Hegseth. But again, whether or not this moves the needle, I don't know. We're going to have to see. I will note, though, maybe it was strategic of the Gallrein campaign in the sense that one of the biggest differences between Gallrein and Thomas Massie is their stance on the war in Iran. It's been one of Thomas Massie's main attack lines for President Trump. He's been probably the loudest GOP critic of the conflict in Iran. He has led some of these war powers resolutions to try to stop the hostilities. So perhaps the Gallrein campaign wanted to show this contrast on the war in Iran. Whether or not it moves the needle for any voters, I'm just not sure. We're going to have to see tomorrow. But it wasn't a massive turnout today. But again, a lot of headlines just because of the unconventional nature of having the defense secretary on the trail during a war.
What do you think about that, General? The defense secretary making a campaign stop for a political candidate during a war. Now, the Pentagon says Hegseth attended in his own personal capacity. He didn't do it with taxpayer dollars. But last I checked, today's a work day and we're at war.
Well, look, I've been a senior military officer in the Pentagon for both Republican and Democratic administrations. I was a cabinet officer for Clinton. Universally, in general, the apolitical officers of government are the Secretary of Defense, the FBI director, and the Attorney General. And the three of us would frequently not be in the room when there were political discussions going on related to electoral politics. It's really unheard of. It's politicizing what has to be a bipartisan national security consensus. Shocking to see it happen.
Luke, nearly 2/3 of Americans think Trump made the wrong decision with this war in Iran. The president does not appear to be close to he doesn't appear to have any good answer for how he's selling this to the American people. Where is this going to go? Like, the politics of this are now impacting policy in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Donald Trump, as our poll shows, is the least popular he has ever been in elective office. And I think a big portion of that is the war in Iran. It is completely at odds with the positions he ran on as a candidate. It's deeply unpopular all across the spectrum, except for with the Republican base. But you're still seeing some slipping even among the Republican base. And, I do think it's telling that his primary focus at the moment is a Republican primary in a red district that Republicans are going to win anyway, to try to get out a critic of the war. So that shows you just how much he dislikes dissent, and how much he wants to get rid of any criticism within the Republican Party. And it's a very strange thing, because the public is turning on Trump. The independents are turning on Trump, but the party is still under his control. And we saw that with the Bill Cassidy race. So it's this dichotomy.